Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the January 2025 Township of Muskoka Lakes Planning Committee meeting, first of the year. Calling the meeting to order at 9 o'clock. I'm confirming that we have a full quorum today with 4 members on Zoom and the remaining 6 here in the chambers. Also present are the CAO, clerk, Director of Development Services and Environment Sustainability, and we have some planning staff members here as well. The public agenda was invited through the email of the township, as always. Today's meeting is being live streamed and recorded in the Township of Muskoka Lakes website and YouTube channel. By participating in the open public meeting today, you are consenting to your image, voice, and comments being recorded and posted online. We do not have a supplementary agenda. And I asked, does anybody on council or on committee rather, have a pecuniary interest, and could they disclose them now? Seeing none today, that's terrific. So our first, well, as we know, motions have been pre-populated with random movers and seconders to expedite the meeting. Members shall physically raise their hand until the chair has confirmed the vote, and if the vote is unclear, a verbal vote will be recorded by the clerk, but this is not considered a recorded vote. It's a public meeting today on 2 of the files, so people who wishing to speak on either of the files will have 5 minutes. Our first item today up is I think it's a straight zoning bylaw application, and I'd like to introduce Emma DeMello. And I think we should all give a round of applause of welcome to Emma. This is her first time presenting to this committee, and she is a new planner in our planning department. So welcome, Emma, and off you go.
Chair Bosomworth. The first application to be heard is zoning bylaw amendment application -41/24 in the name of Muskoka Lakes Golf and Country Club.
The mic's not on.
Mike, oh yeah.
I'll start over.
You won't do that again, I'm sure.
Don't count on it.
The first application to be heard is zoning bylaw amendment application ZBA-41/24 in the name of Muskoka Lakes Golf and Country Club. The subject lands are known municipally as 1330 and 1335 Ferndale Road. Next slide, please. I would direct committee's attention to the submitted zoning sketch on page 29 of the agenda package. The purpose and effect of the application is to permit staff quarters as an accessory use on land currently zoned commercial open space, to provide a site-specific definition of staff quarters, and to permit accessory buildings containing staff quarters within 100 feet from a rural industrial zone. Next slide, please. Notice of this public meeting under the Planning Act was circulated 28 days in advance of this meeting, and 12 comments have been received to date. Comments were received from Nick Snyder, the township's chief building official, stating no objection to the application. Comments were received from Tim Sopko, the township's manager of public works, stating no objection to the application, with the understanding that stormwater management and servicing will be addressed at the site plan stage of development. Comments were received from Douglas Holland, the township's fire prevention officer, stating no concerns with the application as well as the fire response time, and recommending that the Fire Smart Homeowners Manual be consulted to understand how treatments to the property influence wildfire spread. Comments were received from the district, stating no objection to the application, provided the draft zoning bylaw amendment be amended to include a holding symbol requiring the completion of a hydrogeological assessment to the satisfaction of the township. 9 public comments have been received. Letters from Ann Hunt, Karen Reed, Barb McIntosh, and Dave Merchant have been circulated to committee. Additional comments received from the public include the following. An additional letter by Karen Reed, a property owner on Ferndale Road, expresses additional concerns relating to the aesthetic and visual impacts of the development, as well as impacts on the environment and wildlife, noise, unruliness, and traffic. Additional comments were sent from David Merchant, expressing concern for the application concerning the density of the proposed development and its impacts on the environment and wildlife habitat. The letter states that the proposal would be best suited for a location serviced by municipal water and sewer services. Concerns were also expressed regarding fire safety due to the site's proximity to a woodland area. A letter was received from Edward Daglish, neighboring property owner at 1348 Ferndale Road. The letter expresses concerns regarding the treatment and supply of water, sewage collection and treatment, and stormwater mitigation and runoff. A letter was also received from Terry Williams, owner of a property at 1382 Ferndale Road, noting concerns regarding the proximity of the development to the wetland located south of the subject property. The letter also expresses concerns regarding the scale of the proposed development and the visual impacts of the proposal. A letter was also received from Bronwyn Reed, owner of a property located at 1396 Ferndale Road, which expresses concerns regarding the location and scale of the proposed development, visual impacts of the staff quarters buildings, and the impacts of noise, traffic, parking, and garbage generated from the proposal, as well as impacts on the environment. I can read either of these letters in full at the request of committee. Next slide, please. I'd like to take this time to address some of the concerns raised by residents on Ferndale Road who submitted letters of objection to help committee and members of the public better understand why staff have put forward the recommendation outlined in the report. Regarding the scale of the proposed development and its impact on the character of the surrounding area, staff would like to clarify that the number of staff quarters buildings is not prescribed in the draft bylaw. The 14 individual staff buildings shown on the conceptual building plan are one-bedroom staff units, ranging in size from 60 to 100 square meters. Details of the development, including the number, size, and location of units, will be finalized at the site plan stage of development should the application be approved. The buildings are not anticipated to result in significant visual or aesthetic impacts on Ferndale Road, as the development will be required to conform to the setbacks required in the commercial open space zone. Another concern raised by public comments was the environmental impact of the development proposal and wildlife habitat. The proposed development is located approximately 211 feet north of an unevaluated wetland and over 580 feet north of the Hazelwood Trail located on the club lands. An environmental impact study has not been requested and is not required in accordance with the township's official plan, as no development is proposed within 98 feet of the wetland. Next slide, please. Regarding concerns expressed about fire risk, the subject property was identified as having low and moderate fire risk. A wildland fire assessment was not requested as the property does not contain hazardous forest types. Douglas Holland, the township's fire prevention officer, did not object to the application and noted that the fire response time is 13 minutes and 48 seconds. Regarding the traffic and traffic impacts on Ferndale Road, the township's operational services department has stated the department has no objection and a traffic impact study has not been requested. Additionally, a comment was received noting that the photos in the staff report did not fully capture the extent of the property. Staff conducted an additional site visit and have included the images on the screen to further contextualize the site for committee and members of the public. Next slide, please. Staff have prepared a detailed report for committee's consideration. Staff recommend that the application be approved subject to the following. That the draft bylaw be revised to incorporate a holding symbol over the location proposed for staff quarters. The holding symbol is not to be lifted until a satisfactory hydrogeological assessment is completed by a qualified professional and any recommendations are implemented to the satisfaction of the township of Muskoka Lakes. Staff have no further comments at this time and are happy to answer any questions from committee.
Thank you very much. I believe we have the applicant agent is Mr. Allen.
You do. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Ryan Allen, professional planner, Planscape, 104 Kimberley Ave, Bracebridge, Ontario, P1L1Z8. Thank you, Ms. Mello, for your presentation. I also have a presentation of my own that I'd like to share with the committee. I would also note that the club's general manager and I believe a few board members are also in attendance at this meeting as well. The subject property is 1330 and 1335 Ferndale Road. Next slide, please. The application in front of you today is related to a development plan to construct multiple staff quarter buildings on the club's property. The zoning amendment, as was explained, includes staff quarters as an additional permitted use, defines staff quarters to be permitted as part of a golf course and private club, and has a reduced setback from the neighboring RUM3 zone, which is the extractive aggregate zone. Next slide, please. Here's an overview of the club's lands. They have over 135 acres. They're right next door to the Port Carling urban boundary. And just for a bit of history and some context, the club started with a site plan agreement application in 2002 for the area that's currently zoned, that's shown in red, to be permitted for staff quarters. However, it was determined, after the wildland fire risk assessment was completed and a lot of the functional servicing studies, that the site was unsuitable for building because of the types of soil. So a new location had to be selected. And as a result, the area that's highlighted in green, this is the location where the staff quarters buildings are proposed now. The club offers a wide range of services, everything from golfing, tennis lessons, swimming lessons, sailing, dining. So there's quite a range of uses, and it requires a large number of staff to support those uses. Next slide, please. The concept plan that's shown has 14 buildings. They are setback 66 feet from the Ferndale Road, which is the minimum setback. However, there's this RUM3 zone parcel that is right next door, this triangular shaped piece. And those setbacks actually extend beyond the limits of that property and impact this location. So they slightly encroach onto the location proposed for the staff quarters. And you can see the wetland there in the south, that the area to be rezoned is more than 200 feet separated from that wetland. Next slide, please. The concept plan has two components. The buildings in the front are professional buildings intended to be used for the chef, the tennis pro, the golf pro, and their families. These will include 1 bedrooms, possibly 2-bedroom units, and they would be more permanent residents with a kitchen and potentially more permanent occupation year-round. The 10 buildings in the back, they have 4 units in them each. They include maintenance, kitchen, and retail staff, and they'll be occupied from May to Thanksgiving. They do not have a kitchen. Those staff will be getting meals at other facilities on the club's property. The buildings themselves are intended to have a Muskoka style design. It was explained to be that the McMaster's building style that you see on 118 that was recently constructed, dark colors and natural colors. The buildings are 1 story in height and relatively small in size, 650 to 1,000 square feet. There are 30 off-street parking spaces. This is staff housing, so unlike people that commute to work, these staff are already at work. So it's likely more spaces than actually needed. There's a club's general manager that resides immediately next door at 1353 Ferndale Road, and you can see the residents there identified on the plan. There's on-site firefighting water supply. There'll be a fire retention pond that's as part of the stormwater plan that provides adequate fire protection. And I think most importantly with this, that the club currently has 11 housing units throughout the community today in the form of houses, apartment buildings. The development of this site will free up those units to be used by others. And there's also a considerable community investment occurring here, over $2.5 million to build out this plan. Next slide, please. Some quick photos in maybe a better season, depending on your perspective. The area is cleared and open. There's minimal tree removal required, and there's an existing entrance that's coming off Ferndale Road. Next slide, please.
Mr. Allen, if you could wrap it up, you're close to your
Almost
5
done.
minutes.
Thank you, sir. There's some existing roadside forested vegetation. This is looking both north and south down Ferndale Road. Next slide. There is a functional servicing review that's been completed by Pinestone Engineering that's identified and reviewed access, servicing, utilities. There is an environmental certificate of approval required that's being completed by Azimuth Environmental. They will also complete a hydrogeological report. The club is not opposed to a hold zone and will complete that study. I understand they've been retained and it's underway. There are a number of planning merits to this application. The official plan encourages the provision of on-site housing for commercial operations and resorts. Housing is in critical need, and this helps address that supply. The housing will be modern and help support the continued operation of the club. The current housing operations are not suitable for the current use. There's no significant impacts to any aggregate operations. The existing roadside buffers will provide visual screening of the buildings. Staff quarters have been previously approved on this land, and a future site plan agreement will be required before any development occurs. I'd be happy to listen to your comments and answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Allen. Do we have anybody in the waiting room wishing to speak in support of this application? And do we have two visitors today? Are either of you are you speaking in favor of the application?
No. Okay.
It's up for both of you?
No.
All right. Okay. No, that's fine. We'll come to you in a sec. We'll just make sure there's anybody in favor. So do we have anybody else speaking in favor? Are any of the owners here? I don't think so. All right. So is there anybody online at all? In favor? Well, presumably. Okay, let's assume that they are. And if they're not, then we'll be automatically going to those speaking against it. So for those online, we're looking for those who are wishing to speak in favor of this application first. So if you could indicate that that's what you'd like to do, we'll get to you first. There isn't any? All right. Then we have, I think, at least one person in the audience who would like to speak against the application. If you could come up, and you have 5 minutes. If you could start with your name and address.
Thank you, God. You already recognized my letter. All right, sorry. That on? My name is Edward Daglish, otherwise known as Ted. My property is immediately across the road from the property.
Could we have your address, Ted?
Not the MU3, but beyond that, all the property from there down. My major concern, other than what I put in my letter, I won't repeat that, is the parking. These people are going to park there, and how are they going to get from there to the club? They are using these small carts, like golf carts, only they've got a truck on the back of them. None of them are licensed for use on a public road. They are an extreme hazard. And I would like to see the golf course address that particular item, because the golf course has failed to notify the people using them that if they are in an accident, they are liable. The golf course is not. And that is an oversight, as far as I'm concerned, with the golf course. It is a real concern, particularly at the intersection of Ferndale Road and Robert Johnson, Ruth, you know. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could you give us your address, please?
Sorry, 1348 Ferndale Road. And I object to the club being called 1330. That is nowhere near where the fire department would go. 1330 would be in the middle of Robert Johnson Road. I think it should be reviewed, but that's something totally separate.
Thank you very much. So now, do we have, could we have those come in who are online that would wish to speak against the application?
Hello?
Morning.
I'm
You could
sorry, I
treat-
am I being heard?
You are being heard, but we can't see you yet. If you
Okay,
could,
I'm sorry, I'm
There
just
we are.
seeing, there, good. So hi there. I'm speaking on behalf of the Reed family. Unfortunately, many cannot be here because they work and they couldn't get time away from work to do this meeting.
could you start with your name and address?
My name is Karen Reed, Reed, and the address is 1396 Ferndale Road.
You have 5 minutes.
I just want to go back. I just wanted to clarify when you said that there wasn't at the other property that you have the soil is not acceptable. I was a little uncertain what that meant. Are you saying that it is too soft? Is it that pylons can't be placed down there? Or is it more that that area is just not as sightly? You want to keep your staff kind of away from the entrance to your club, so it's not as unsightly to your club. I just wasn't clear about that, what that soil issue was about, and why that buildings could not be placed there. A number of us, I didn't hear Terry and Grant Williams' name mentioned, but they did send a letter in and they want to make sure that it was received. Just again, most of us are saying that the size of this project just seems extensive. And I'm not so sure if I'm able to say what I'm going to say next, because it might not be the right meeting, but I will go ahead and you can stop me. We're just really concerned now about how the noise level will be increased. We know what staff housing can be like. We are concerned about the ramifications of a parting and just a messy environment. Now bears, we rarely get bears, but I could just see this situation affecting the Ferndale cottagers at our end, which this will greatly affect. And so just wanted to look at that location again. Also looking at the environmental, you mentioned that there will be an environmental assessment done, but I was informed that there didn't need to be one, but that concerned us because of all the cars and the septic and the number of buildings and the leaching that can occur. So we have a number of concerns that still have not been addressed in the meetings thus far. So I will continue to listen, but just voicing our great concern for how this will also impact the cottages on Ferndale Road that have to go past this every day and that they are there, and how that now will take away from their enjoyment at their cottages. So, and then environmentally, yeah, really just concerned because we've always been concerned about the bog and different areas. And drainage, that came up too. So how that's impacted. I think I've had my 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I suggest we'll get staff to answer some of those questions at the end of, we may have some overlap and some other questions. We'll gather them up and try to answer them at the end, if that's all
Thank
right
you.
with you.
Thank you.
Do we have another person wishing to speak against this application?
Good morning.
Good morning. We can see you and hear you if you start with your name and address, and you have 5 minutes.
Yes, it's Brian Hare, and my address is 1038 Robert Johnson Road, mailing address box 128, Fort Carlin. I have several concerns with this, although I support parts of the application. I do support the location. I think it's a suitable location for a staff house. My concern is really that what we've got here, in my mind, is a bit of a Trojan horse. Originally, when I looked at this, it's proposing 14 units. Now I see that we've actually got 40. So what this boils down to, in my mind, is a residential development. These are residential dwelling units. They are roughly 700 square feet each. And in any zoning area that's normally designated as residential, you're allowed a maximum of 2 dwellings per lot. And now we're looking at an accessory use to the primary use within an OS3 zone, which isn't even a residential zone to start with. So now you've got a multi-residential development, which is normally only allowed in the urban service area, where you have water, sewer, and fire hydrant protection. An example of this is that at the Mattamy development on Ferndale Road, it was required to extend water and sewer to that location because of the magnitude of the development. They have a beautiful staff house for all of their staff in one building. 14 units is definitely a residential development, and it's, in my mind, it's being disguised as, I mean, it's being used as staff quarters, but in reality, they are residential dwelling units. There is no definition in the bylaw of staff quarters. This seems to be a new word. You do have the wording staff house or staff housing in the bylaw. And I think if the draft bylaw were amended again to take out the word staff quarters and put in the word staff house instead, it would be a lot more palatable proposal. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have anybody else? No one else has raised their hand. Very well. Before we move on, if I could ask staff, I think I caught about 4 or 5 points here. One, if we could just expand on the environmental issue that concerns were raised, expand on what the deficiencies are in the previous site, address noise. There was a concern about golf carts and dangerous use on the road, and then residential. Are these residential units, and why is it not being considered a subdivision to have the rules of subdivision? And then some possible thoughts about what's the definition of staff quarters versus staff housing. So who in staff would like to address those? Mr. Sharp.
Through you, Chair, and pardon me. Good morning, members of committee, members of the public, and Mr. Allen, the applicant's agent. I'll do my best to try to answer some of the questions. I have my own list going here. If I miss any, you may have to remind me, Chair. But with respect to the environmental piece, in this case, staff didn't request an environmental impact study or a scoped environmental impact study. Given that in this case, the nearest natural heritage feature is about 200 feet away from where the proposed staff quarters location is to be located. And as Mr. Allen and Ms. DeMello pointed out, the site where the proposed staff quarters is to be located is largely cleared. The applicant would have obligations under the Endangered Species Act 2007 with respect to ensuring that whatever activities that they're doing on site adhere to the legislative requirements contained within that act. Under the umbrella of environmental, there's also the piece with respect to servicing private on-site sewage disposal system. As I understand it, there will be a requirement for the club to amend its existing environmental compliance approval. Mr. Allen has provided a functional servicing report identifying how the site is to be serviced. Also under the umbrella of environmental, there's the piece on stormwater management. a stormwater management plan is also being provided, demonstrating how stormwater management on the property will be administered. If this application is approved and the site is developed with the approved staff quarters, those staff quarters would be subject to the township site plan control process and the functional servicing report and the stormwater management plan and the hydrogeological study that's been recommended to be implemented through a hold zone. All of those considerations would be addressed through the site plan control process. I believe there was mention of a submission that may not have been received in the name of Williams. I can confirm that Terry Williams had provided a letter. It was received and it was noted by Ms. DeMello. With respect to the soils in the approved site, I would mention that in this particular instance, that there is an approved location that was approved through a bylaw from the 1990s for staff quarters on the property. The reason that this application is in front of you today is because it was determined that that location wasn't suitable due to site-specific soil conditions. I would look to Mr. Allen to provide the specific details of what was determined in that location and why it wasn't appropriate. With respect to the notion of staff quarters versus residential, I believe Mr. Hare had identified that there is no definition in the zoning bylaw with respect to staff quarters. In fact, there is a definition of staff quarters. However, it speaks to a tourist resort. What's in front of you today in part is to permit staff quarters in this new location and to define it specifically as an accessory building for accommodating only the employees of a golf course and private club, and which may contain a kitchen. So there is a specific definition. And I would note that the buildings would need to be accessory to the main use on the property, which is as a golf course and a private club. Although the buildings will be used to accommodate employees of the golf course, these aren't residential dwelling units. There is a distinction. So happy to elaborate on any of those considerations. Thank you.
Just for everybody's understanding, what's the difference between a residence and just that last point you made about it being a resident? They're not residents, they're staff quarters. What defines the difference?
I suppose I'd have to look at the definition of dwelling unit in the zoning bylaw. But dwelling unit is intended to be for a residential purpose. It's intended to accommodate a family, providing year-round accommodation. I think in this particular instance, I would also mention that a dwelling unit is intended in a lot of zones to be a main use. So residential is a main use on properties where a dwelling unit is permitted. In this particular instance, the zoning bylaw and the bylaw that's in front of you specifically defines staff quarters as an accessory building only for the accommodation of the employees of the golf course or the private club.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Allen, could you perhaps tell us the deficiency in the existing approved site with the soil problems? If you just expand on that for us.
Absolutely. And I'm not an engineer, so I'm sorry if I'm not using the technical terminology, but I heard the word muck, that it's deep muck soil. And I think what the organics, what the engineers would say is unstable organics is the technical term. Now, there may be an ability to build on those lands in the future if technology allows, but at this point, it's cost prohibitive to build in that location. So the alternative was selected.
And have you got any other comments you'd like to make after hearing what you've heard?
I don't. Mr. Sharp answered those questions very well. I think the question that was on your list that he did not respond to is related to the golf carts.
Yeah.
The club is listening. There are members, general manager and board members listening on this call. I will report back and explain the concern that was raised. I don't think that the use of golf carts on Ferndale Road is related to this application directly, but I will raise it with the club.
Thank you very much. Just one more ask if anybody else has raised their hand. If not, we will, very good. Yes, sir.
Sorry, Jim Leach at 1406 Ferndale. I
Can you
heard,
turn your mic on, please? Yeah, and you've got 5 minutes. All right.
I heard in Mr. Allen's presentation that 4 of these
The
buildings.
mic was on.
I heard that in Mr. Allen's presentation that 4 of these buildings will be 12-month permanent residence for and not seasonal quarters and for families. So just listening to this conversation and what Mr. Hare said, that kind of does in what was given as a definition of staff quarters versus a single family dwelling. That kind of sounds like a single family dwelling to me. Number 2 is with regard to parking. Can the club tell us whether it's going to be hard surface or whether or not water is going to be able to hard surface, which will prevent huge runoff, given that there's 33 spaces. Well, those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Staff, can you talk to those for us? Mr. Sharp?
Thank you, Chair. I really don't have a whole lot more to add. I recognize that there may be a small amount of overlap or there may be overlap between a dwelling unit and staff quarters. Of course, you know, at the end of the day, the building is there and it's going to accommodate people. So in that way, they are related. However, the definition of staff quarters, as I had stated in the bylaw, is very, very specific, and it's for the accommodation of employees of the golf course and the private club. These units aren't going to be just for anybody. They're not going to be, the ownership isn't going to be divided by way of plan of condominium. They're not, you know, going to be rented to, you know, just anybody. These units are going to be available to the employees of the golf course, and that's it.
That's the key differentiator between a dwelling unit and a staff unit. All right. What was the other point? Yes, thank you. Mr. Allen, do you have any comments on the hard surface? Question?
Thank you. The surface will be gravel parking, and the stormwater management plan will consider that surface drainage. And maybe just to build on Mr. Sharp's point about the types of units. For the professional staff, the chef, the golf pro, the tennis pro, these are older people that offer these services, which typically have families, children, or a spouse. And it's very competitive with other clubs to get the best people, and offering the best accommodations helps the club be competitive to get the best staff to provide the best experience for their members. So it's not necessarily that they will be residing there year round. There would be a potential to. I don't see much golf being played right now, but the potential would be that it serves as more of a home for a family of the professional, versus the seasonal staff are there for just the summer months and are younger without families.
Okay, thank you very much. Committee, I turn it over to you for questions of the applicant, of staff. Do we have any questions on this? Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Mr. Allen. Mr. Allen, there had been mention of other buildings on the golf course that are currently used as staff housing. So what are the plans for those establishment or buildings after? Are they going to become short-term rental accommodations for golfers? Thank you.
Mr. Allen?
Thank you, Councilor Roberts. Through you, Mr. Chair. The current staff housing that's on the club lands is one building that is contains more of a bunkhouse style of accommodations for men and women. There is a single men's shared washroom and there's a single women's shared washroom. That is not an ideal scenario for the club. I'm not sure what their long-term plans are for that use, if they will cease to use it for staff housing. Clearly, they'll need it in the interim as they build these units. There's no intention of renting these units out. They're not suitable to be rentals, and there's no intention to use them that way.
Councilor Nishikawa?
I need a little preamble, if you don't mind. But
Preambles are fine.
as being on the district housing committee, this shocks me. And I'm trying to find my questions because, and I will direct it to Mr. Sharp, but we wouldn't allow this anywhere. And I don't get why we would bend the rules for this particular situation. And I'm saying this because we've seen other applications, and over the years we've seen other requests come forward, not necessarily this council, but and we've always hung our thing on it's not on sewer and water. So I don't understand our justifications of allowing this through and it not being on sewer and water. I have a lot of concerns about not having one staff building, apartment building, whatever you want to call it. Maybe something similar to Ripplewood or whatever, but I don't understand how we can be bending the rules this much when in our district housing requirements and everything, we are so hard on being on sewer and water.
Mr. Sharp, I think the question there was, how is this different? It's coming back to, I think you've partially answered it already, but if you could just ask the question or answer the question, well, how is this different from an application that would not be on these kind of properties, and we wouldn't allow it for the points Councillor Nishikawa raised?
Thank you. I'm hesitant to say it wouldn't be allowed anywhere else. We would need to look at every application that's filed, every property, and they all have their unique circumstances. In this particular instance, the property is zoned open space commercial. There is a golf course on the property. Clearly, they have a need for staff housing. What's also unique about the property is that in the 1990s, there was a bylaw that currently is on the books. It exists that permitted what's proposed through this application in a different location on the property. There was no limitation on the number of units, the number of buildings, staff quarters were permitted in the location where it's been determined that they can't be built because of, as Mr. Allen pointed out, the mucky soils. So really all that's proposed in this application is to permit those same staff quarters in a different location on the property. Hopefully that helps answer. I see Mr. Pink may wish to speak. Thank you.
CEO Pink?
Thank you. Good morning, committee. I think it might help a little bit with more of the background. I think I understand where Councillor Nishikawa's questions are originating from. And admittedly, while there is some gray area, and I think we've heard that discussion around staff quarters and the residents, and you can go on with other uses as well, 10 trailer parks, resorts, Airbnb, short-term rentals, there is that gray area. But it is important, as Mr. Sharp pointed out, the definition and the fact that this is an accessory use. It is a staff quarter and it's not defined as a single family dwelling. If this was a multi-residential use, then Councillor Nishikawa's concerns would certainly be at the forefront. Because should that communal sewage disposal system fail, the Ontario legislation would require the District of Muskoka and the taxpayer to actually operate and assume that servicing system. And that's a great risk and liability that the district has been very, I'm not going to say hesitant, they've refused to take on that risk. But the distinction here is that it is a staff quarters use. It is an accessory to a golf course. So should that communal sewage disposal system fail, presumably the business would be required to either bring it up to snuff, sell, or close. In essence, the district would not have to take on that system. There would be, to put it bluntly, there wouldn't be residents or families living on the, would have to be kicked out of their unit should it have been a residence. Because it's staff quarters, there would be no business, then presumably there'd be no employees and no one, again, having to either take over the system or without a place to, a roof over their heads. So I hope that helps explain.
Councillor Nishikawa, do you have another question or?
Well, my concern
we could
is
move this
that-
to debate if you'd like.
No, it was more, my concern is that, to clarify, I thought there were 4 houses, like residential family is gonna live there. We're not just talking about the other 1-bedroom units that apparently have no cooking, but there's 4 residents there that, again, we make other people jump through different hoops and things, so I'm just wondering why we're, other than the ownership, we're now talking just about ownership. But I'm just saying, if I go and rezone my property because I'm running a business off my property, are you gonna allow, I think we're opening doors up here that
Right.
would be great for housing, but honestly, it's been against every policy that we've had for years, so. And I was around when we did this 2000 thing, and I remember this so clearly, and I'm very concerned.
Thank you for that. Let's go on with the questions and then we'll read the resolution. Mayor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you. When we get to the part where we can make comment, there are a lot of very strong features to this application, but I do still want to go back and ask a couple questions about the issue that was raised both, I think, by Mr. Leach and also earlier by Mr. Hare. I think we're splitting hairs if we're trying to decide whether these are residences or whether they are staff quarters, unless the only distinction is that everybody who lives in them has to have a paycheck from the property owner. And essentially, that's what I think I'm reading or hearing and reading, is that the distinguishing feature between a residence in this particular case and a staff quarter is that everybody who lives in this building presumably is on the payroll. I assume they're on the payroll year round if they're living there year round. I do understand in the circumstances of a club like this one, that some of your staff at the upper end are going to be head of dining, the club manager, the pro presumably is not of the type that's going to live in a dorm environment. They're going to come with families, and I understand that. So I just want to make sure I understand that if that's the only distinction, I mean, I can accept it. I just want to make sure I understand that as a distinction. And the second thing I want to say, hate to sound like a frustrated lawyer, but when I look at the definition of what we're trying to change or amend the bylaw to reflect, I'm not real good at keeping track of my notes. The definition that we're trying to work towards is an accessory building for accommodating only the employees of a golf course and private club. Is it not the golf course and private club, or can we have employees of Port Carling Golf and Country Club living there or somewhere else? It seems to me that it should be pretty nailed down. Maybe it is elsewhere, but by that definition, I think it's a little open. And that's a question, I think.
Mr. Sharp. There are 2 questions in there.
Thank you. Maybe I'll start with the second question. Fair point. I think with respect to the definition, if it's something that you'd like to tighten up, we could certainly change the wording. And I would read the definition similar to you with respect to your first question. It clearly states the employees. So I would say it's the people who are employed by the golf course. So I think we're reading it the same. Thank you.
And the other question?
I think I answered both of the questions, but like I said, with respect to the wording of the definition of itself. It says a golf course. So fair point. We could tweak the wording at the direction of committee to improve that if you wish. Thank you.
All right. All right, I'm going to read the resolution. You have a question? All right.
Julie, just a
Councillor
question.
Robertson, Councillor Edwards.
Through you to staff, just clarification and acknowledgement that I have the right understanding is the application is we're talking to is just that piece of property. If they take a tractor off there or a golf cart, it's not a planning matter any longer. Is that correct?
Mr. Sharp?
Through you, Chair, I may need some clarification. Your question is with respect to the actual use of a tractor or a
I
golf
guess
cart?
the example, I'm sorry, but the example would be in Bella, if we have people that have a residence and they're using a golf cart to run around Bella, then that's a police matter.
Mr. Sharp?
Through you, Chair, while I'm not an expert in matters with respect to transportation law, I would think that certainly not a planning matter. It's more of an enforcement matter, and I think that the ability to enforce that would fall on the OPP. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. I have a few through the chair. This is for Mr. Allen. There's 14 individual one-bedroom units, is that right?
Mr. Allen?
Thank you. And maybe a point of clarification, because I think my report may have confused things slightly. There's 14 total buildings on the property. 4 of those buildings are the professional staff buildings, and those will be 1-bedroom, possibly 2-bedroom units. There are 10 other buildings, and those buildings would each have 4 single-bedroom units within them, for a total of 44 units on the property within 14 total buildings. I hope that clarifies things.
Councillor Edwards?
Through the chair. I'm reading on page 9, 14 individual 1-bedroom accessory staff quarters. Not 3,
so
4
I think
bedroom.
that's where my confusion, or my apologies for any confusion in my report, which is why I wanted to clarify today with this presentation I gave to the committee.
Well, like what?
Councillor Edwards?
Is our report that I'm voting on is 14 1-bedroom, not 4-bedroom or anything else like that. Is that right?
Mr. Sharp, my understanding is that that we're not approving the actual buildings or the contents of the building, and all those will be approved at site plan. Is that correct?
That is correct. We're not approving a number of buildings at this point, unless, of course, committee wanted to stipulate some limit on the number of staff quarters that would be permitted in the proposed location. And to my understanding, Mr. Allen has clarified. There are 14 buildings, and it sounds like there are 44 units proposed in total.
Councillor Edwards?
Through the chair, this is a big change as far as I'm concerned, because then you have to look at the bedrooms, so you can check with the building department as far as washrooms and bedrooms and everything else like that. I don't think we have all the information here and that, and to say that.
Do you have a question, Mr. Edwards, or should I read the resolution?
Pardon?
Do you have a
No,
question?
I'm still asking the question.
Okay.
The question is, how can we quantify 4 bedrooms instead of 1-bedroom units? That's my question to the planning. Were they aware of all this?
Mr. Sharp?
Sorry, I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. How can we quantify the number of units, and were they aware of this? I'm not sure who they are.
I think the question is, Councillor Edwards, is, how could we fix the number of bedrooms at this point? Is that the question, Councillor Edwards?
Well, yes, because the thing is this, like it completely changes the whole dynamic. So if you're putting, and I seen on page 42, there was a nice little drawing that we had, and it showed one-bedroom units.
Mr. Sharp, can you expand to us what we're actually approving here and what would be the limits of what the applicant could do under this application? Could he put in more buildings, fewer buildings, more bedrooms, less buildings? How open? My understanding is it's being left up to staff at the site plan agreement, if I've got the right term. And then, what boundaries are there in there that we are actually approving today?
Yes, so it's my understanding that as the application's been laid out, there was no sort of limitation put in the bylaw itself with respect to the number of units that could be constructed. That would fall under the zoning and, with respect to things like lot coverage and setbacks and so on and so forth. There would also be, some servicing constraints that would come into play. It was our understanding that there were 14 one-unit buildings proposed. It sounds like that may have increased. I would perhaps ask Mr. Allen if the FSR considered the total number of units that are proposed. That I think that would be a question that I would have at this point, and perhaps maybe I'd defer to him on that piece. Thank you.
Mr. Allen, can you clarify?
Yes, thank you. And I do apologize. It's entirely my mistake between units and buildings. The FSR did consider the total 44 units as part of the review of the servicing needs. It was my planning report that referenced the 14 one-bedroom units, when it should have referred to 14 buildings with one-bedroom units within those buildings.
Mr. Sharp, could you just clarify what, I think you said SFR? What's an FSR?
Sorry, I should be speaking in layman's terms. It's a functional servicing report that was submitted.
Can you explain what a functioning services report is?
Yeah, it speaks to how the property would be serviced with respect to the private on-site sewage disposal system and water needs. Thank you.
All right. Councillor Edwards, a question. Folks, I think perhaps we should read the resolution because I think people are itching to get opinions out here.
We could put page 42 up on the screen. Their drawings from Mr. Allen shows a floor layout of a one-bedroom thing. That's what I would be voting on a four-bedroom house. And that's a big difference.
I'm going to read the resolution. We can still ask questions. Moved by Councillor McIntyre, seconded by Councillor Mazin. Be it resolved that zoning bylaw amendment application ZBA 42/24 Muskoka Lakes Golf and Country Club Limited be approved subject to the following: that the draft bylaw be revised to incorporate a holding bracket H symbol over the location proposed for staff quarters. The holding bracket H symbols is not to be lifted until a satisfactory hydrogeological assessment is completed by a qualified professional, and any recommendations are implemented to the satisfaction of the Township of Muskoka Lakes. Mr. Edwards, I cut you off there, so if you want to just make your final point there.
Up on the screen, page 42 of the agenda, which shows a little cottage with one bedroom in it. That's what I'd be voting on, and now I find out it's 4 bedrooms. How do you get 4 bedrooms in there?
Thank you very much. Councillor Nishikawa, you had your hand up.
Again, it was along that line because that's where I was going. My concern that this is a small community, like this is we're building a new subdivision essentially. When you talk about that many people it does affect the community. And again, I'm not clear. I'm going to request that this gets deferred unless, because the information that we're getting at the last minute concerns me as well.
Mayor Kelly.
Thank you.
Mayor Kelly and then Councillor Mazan. I see here having that.
Oh, sorry, she was there first.
All right, Councillor Mazan, sorry.
Thank you, and through you. I think just following Councillor Edwards' questions, just for anybody who is also watching, I think it's really important for all of us to understand the difference between a unit, and let's just do the math here, that it is a unit really a bed?
Mr. Sharp, is a unit a bed? Mr. Sharp?
Through you, Chair, I believe ultimately, essentially what we're talking about in with respect to units would be a bed.
Bed or a bedroom?
Well, I would look to Mr. Allen again with respect to units and what his with respect to how he's defining that.
Mr. Allen?
Well, thank you. Through you, one staff per unit, one staff per bedroom.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Kelly?
Wait,
Thanks.
sorry.
Oh,
Could
I'm
I have
sorry.
supplemental?
Yes, of course.
So if I just would like to follow this math because I think it will be helpful for all of us. What I just think I heard there was there's one staff per bedroom. Is that right?
And one bedroom per unit.
There's one bedroom per unit. And then I heard the number 44, I believe, being used, that there's 44 units being recommended on this property, and that's the maximum. Is that correct?
Mr. Sharp, is that your understanding? Or Mr. Allen, are you suggesting that the maximum would be 44?
Thank you. Through you, and maybe I can understand maybe where some of this confusion is coming from. The bylaw in front of the committee is very similar to the 1992 bylaw. Simply allows staff quarters as an additional permitted use. There is no number of units, number of buildings, number of bedrooms, and there's no specific plan or drawing attached to that old approval. So this new proposal has a very similar flavor to that old bylaw. The use is proposed to be an additional permitted use. There's setbacks that are proposed to be reduced in a definition to address the private club. And the future development details, the specific building sizes, whether there's 650 square feet or 1,000 square feet, whether they're separated by 15 feet or 18 feet, those would be addressed at the site plan approval stage. Now, the club didn't go to the extensive effort to have the engineers prepare a functional servicing review with a very detailed layout, including parking lots, stormwater drainage, and grading, not to build that plan. So I think there should be some confidence around the table that the plan that has been developed and put forward by Pinestone is the plan that they are proposing to move forward with to the site plan stage. But as you also heard me mention earlier, this is a $2.5 million project. There's a lot of dollars to be raised to make this work. So it's unclear exactly if all of those buildings would be built at the same time, if it's a staged approach, which buildings may be built before other buildings. So the club would like the flexibility to proceed through the site plan stage when they're ready with the buildings that they can afford to build.
Thank
I hope
you.
that answers the question.
If I could, still.
Yes, Councillor Mazza.
Thank you. And I think I understand that, and I do appreciate Mr. Allen's comments there. Again, I'm just trying to make sure I understand the math as somebody who has to put my hand up to vote on these things as well. So if it's 44 units, as described in the report, it looked to me that there's 4 units that, are for the professional staff, understood. Those have the potential to be 4 bedrooms, and I'm hearing. So that would be 16 units. And the other 10 would be single units. So that to me would be just what's in front and laid out in the report, 26 units. So I think if the FSR is saying that it is okay to service up to 44 units, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the difference between these two.
Mr. Sharp, does the SFR, what is it? FSR allow up to 44 units? And I think 44 units being a bedroom with 1 bed. Director Huff.
Thank you to the committee. So I appreciate that the confusion about the units. In looking at the FSR, there are, I think from a staff perspective, still some sections that are unclear whether or not the FSR actually contemplated 44 units. And I would give as an example in the sewage section, it specifically states that new sewage works will need to be constructed to service the 14 single bedroom cabins. So I think it was, as committee's suggestion that the matter be deferred would be a good recommendation at this time, just so that staff could also feel comfortable that the servicing piece of this has in fact recognized the 44 units in total.
Councillor Nishikawa.
And if I could ask through you to staff specifically, I'm feeling very clear that district did not pick up on this. Because we've dealt with other applications, for instance, in Huntsville that eventually got turned down, but this has not been a clear application at all today. And I'm very concerned that district did not read the numbers. Understand.
Mayor Kelly.
Thank you. And through you, I did have a question about the FSR. I hear Director Huff and her comments. I think it is a deferral. For the record, there are some very strong features of this that I think could support. And as the chair of the Affordable and Attainable Housing, there are some neat things here, but we should never be forced to make any kind of decision based on somebody's calculation on the back of an envelope. I bet if we canvassed the 10 of us, we've got 14 different opinions about what we're approving. So I'm fully in support of deferral.
I'm interested in the idea of getting 14 opinions from 10 different people, but. All right, I think, I don't think I need to poll. I think it's clear that we would like a deferral on this. So we will defer. Say that again. All right. I need a resolution, and do we have one? 2 minutes for heavy breathing, and we'll have a resolution.
To there, see, that's where they don't, it's like.
All right, we have a resolution for deferral. Moved by Councillor Nishikawa, seconded by Councillor Mazin. Be it resolved that zoning bylaw amendment application ZBA 41/24 Muskoka Lakes Golf and Country Club Limited be deferred to allow for clarification on the number of buildings proposed and the number of units within each building, as well as if the FSR appropriately contemplated the total number of units approved. Any questions? Any discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. Okay, now we will take a 10-minute break. 15 minutes. So we'll come back at 25 after.
Thank you.
That 10.
How are you doing? Seen you in a while.
Has been a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a
Okay, committee.
It's also on the library board.
Or the museum.
Museum board, so, yeah.
If our Zoomers could come in, thank you. Councillor Kent, I think you wanted to address committee. Let me
Yeah.
allow you to do that right now.
Thank you. Yes, I apologize. I stepped off the call after about the first 5 minutes of the discussion about Muskoka Lakes. I realized inadvertently that I had not put up my hand as having a conflict. So I stepped off, turned off the volume, and going forward, I will be not participating in those conversations. I'm a member of the club and an active member, and I felt I needed to step out of that conversation.
For conflict of interest. All right,
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, committee. Our next case is Report Plan 2025-005 ZBA 47/24 Marie and PIERRE Productions, Inc. And Ms. Crowder is going to tell us about this application.
Thank you, Chair Bosomworth. Just wait for the PowerPoint to get queued up. Okay. So the next application to be heard is zoning bylaw amendment application ZBA 4724 in the name of Marie and PIERRE Productions Incorporated. The subject lands are known municipally as 1529 Juddhaven Road. I would direct committee's attention to the submitted zoning sketches on pages 192 and 193 of the agenda package. The purpose and effect of the application is to deem a waterfront parcel and a backlot parcel separated by a road allowance associated with Juddhaven Road as one lot for planning purposes, and to convert a dwelling unit within a two-story boathouse to a sleeping cabin. The subject property was once part of the Sugar Hill Resort, a commercially zoned property containing a main lodge, 7 housekeeping units, 2 staff houses, a barn and a tennis court, and a boathouse and dock. Consent application B394088ML was conditionally approved to create 2 new lots, one of which forms the subject property in the current application. A condition of this approval was that a consent agreement be entered into and registered on title, which includes a stipulation that so long as the waterfront parcel contains a dwelling, which is the 2-story boathouse in the current application, circa 1984, no other building, including on the backlot parcel, shall be used as a dwelling. This application seeks to change the use of the existing dwelling on the waterfront parcel to a sleeping cabin to allow them to construct a dwelling on the backlot parcel. Notice of this public meeting under the Planning Act was circulated 31 days in advance of this meeting, and 4 comments have been received to date. Comments were received from Nick Snyder, the township's chief building official, stating no objection to the application, but noting that the existing 2-story dwelling at the waterfront is serviced by a sewage system on the backlot parcel. Services exist beneath the township road, and a license/encroachment agreement is required to address this condition. An agreement deeming the waterfront and backlot parcels as one and prohibiting the sale of these parts separately is required. Comments were received from Tim Sopko, Manager of Operational Services, stating that a reduction in setbacks from the road allowance can present future maintenance issues and increased costs associated with tree maintenance. Operational Services would prefer that the setback from the road allowance be achieved if possible, but understands that this is an existing condition. If there are plans to redevelop or rebuild in the future, setbacks should be achieved to the extent possible. The existing tennis court encroaches upon the road allowance and is subject to a roadway encroachment agreement. An encroachment agreement is required for this encroachment if the tennis court is to remain in place. Operational Services does not support private servicing in the road allowance. It is understood that there is a septic line that travels under the road from the waterfront boathouse to a septic bed on the back lot as an existing condition. A license agreement is required for the existing septic line, and the requirement for a license agreement should be a condition of approval for this application. As part of the license agreement approval process, operational services will request that the existing septic line be replaced to meet the township requirements and standards. Site constraints due to the reduced setback of the existing boathouse may limit the ability of the applicant to achieve the full standard. If warranted, operational services will work with the applicant through the license agreement process to find an acceptable solution, given that this is an existing condition. Comments were received from Douglas Holland, the township's fire prevention officer, stating no objection to the application. The calculated fire response time is 15 minutes and 38 seconds based on the fire department's average shoot time in the last 36 months, and a travel distance of 4.1 kilometers from the fire station. This response time is outside of the NFPA rural response time objective of 14 minutes. When the response is outside of this rural response time objective, it is prudent to subject developments to additional design requirements beyond the minimum in the building code, potentially including fire sprinklers, increased spatial separations, and building materials of higher fire resistance ratings. As construction will be occurring on the property, we encourage pre-planning with the fire department concerning fire risks during this vulnerable phase of development. The Fire Smart Homeowners Manual should be consulted to understand how treatments to the property influence wildfire spread. Lastly, comments were received from Curtis Sivrit, Manager of Planning at the District Municipality of Muskoka, stating that district staff recommend denial of the application with respect to the conversion of the dwelling unit on the first floor of the existing boathouse into a sleeping cabin, but noting that district staff would not be opposed to the remainder of the application. The township's official plan and comprehensive zoning bylaw are clear that the maximum permitted size for a sleeping cabin is 650 square feet. The proposed two-story sleeping cabin would be 809 square feet in size. Additionally, the first story of the proposed sleeping cabin is located within the floodplain of Lake Rosso. Due to these considerations, staff are unable to support exemption F, being the request to convert the first story of the boathouse from a dwelling unit to a sleeping cabin. Staff have prepared a detailed report for committee's consideration. As previously noted, staff recommend that exemption F be denied. Staff further recommend that exemptions A, B, C, D, and E be approved, subject to the following: that the draft bylaw be revised to require a minimum setback of 66 feet from the road allowance abutting Juddhaven Road for development of a dwelling on the backlot parcel. That the draft bylaw be revised to prohibit the first story portion of the two-story boathouse from containing habitable floor area. That the draft bylaw be revised to permit a sleeping cabin with a floor area of 350 square feet within the second story portion of the two-story boathouse, and that any necessary revisions to the draft bylaw and schedules be made. Staff further recommend that third reading of the bylaw be withheld until such time as the consent agreement registered on title for the waterfront and backlot parcels be amended to the satisfaction of the township to reflect the following: that the owner agrees not to separately convey or transfer the waterfront and backlot parcels, that the owner agrees to complete construction of a dwelling on the backlot parcel within 4 years of the date of approval of the bylaw, the sleeping cabin on the backlot parcel is removed to the satisfaction of the township or brought into zoning compliance, and that a satisfactory license agreement is entered into with the township for a force main pump line located beneath the road allowance associated with Juddhaven Road. Staff have no further comments at this time and are happy to answer any questions from committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Crowder. The applicant's agent, are they waiting in line? Are they online? Mr. Sogor, I think it is.
Good morning, Chair and Planning Committee members. My name is Alex Sogar with Madison Taylor Design at 14 Finley Mills Road in Midhurst, Ontario. I am.
You have 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Thank you, sir. So we completely agree with the recommendations set forth by staff in the exemptions A through F, and we understand why exemption F is proposed to be denied as that first floor is in a flood zone and it is not technically habitable space. We are only looking to turn the upper floor, which does contain bedrooms, into a habitable floor as a sleeping cabin. So we are allowed to build a modest sized cottage on the back lot. We have been working through this application with Nick Snyder and Emily Crowder over the past couple months, and we thank them for their time and all the detail that they've put into this report. And in regards to the operational service request with the existing septic line underneath the road, we understand that an exploratory hole should be dug first in order to figure out what that septic line is underneath there. And at that time, if we do have to replace it, we can definitely go through that and work with the operational services to have a license agreement required for that.
Thank you very much. Do we have anybody is wishing to speak in support or against this application? Doesn't look like it. Very well. Committee. Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. Through you to Emily, I think there was a comment made about the size of the bunkie, and I'm going to stick with the I think it was 340 square feet or something in that range. If we were to approve this and there was no further addition to the first floor level, are they able to expand that boathouse, the bunkie portion, to the size of what we allow for a bunkie?
Ms. Crowder.
Through you, Chair Bosomworth, to Councillor Nishikawa. No, they cannot expand the size of the second story of the boathouse. This property is deficient in frontage for the requirement for a two-story boathouse. The reason that it's permitted is because it's legal non-complying today. So any future expansion of the second story of the boathouse would require planning approvals.
Committee, any other questions? Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair Bosomworth. I had just had maybe it's a clarification. I'm a bit confused. I guess this is for Emily or Ms. Crowder. What is going to happen to the space on the main floor of that boathouse? Are they being told you can't use it for living quarters, although it's living quarters now?
Ms. Crowder?
Yeah, and then my second concern is I just would love some thoughts about I don't know how busy a road this is because I'm not as familiar with this part of the lake. But the movement across the road is a concern to me. And I'm wondering what thoughts people have on that. Thank you.
Ms. Crowder, two specific questions there.
Through you, Chair Bosomworth. The first story of the boathouse today, well, the boathouse altogether today is a two-story dwelling. So it has habitable floor area on both the first and second stories. Per the historic consent agreement that's on title for the property, it prohibits any future development of a dwelling on that backlot parcel because there's technically a dwelling on the waterfront parcel today. So the property owner's plans are to construct a dwelling on the backlot parcel. And in order for them to do that, they need to change the use of the boathouse that exists on the waterfront lot. So they have opted to seek it to be changed to a sleeping cabin. As you know, in the township, we're pretty strict about the size of sleeping cabins to the 650 square feet. And the first story use of boathouses, as we know, is a big topic in the township, but it also is within the floodplain. So under our rules today, the use on the first story needs to change to garner staff's approval of potential dwelling on the back lot. And that would need to change to a use that is permitted under our bylaws today. So that would be marine storage. As you know, we don't require wet slips in the boathouses yet, and this doesn't have a wet slip. So the use would need to be, storage of marine related facilities, and it would constitute the removal of some habitable features that are in there today, such as the cooking facilities. So that's sort of the first part there. And then the traffic across the road. The way that staff view this component, we did consider that is that the waterfront parcel today is a dwelling use, which inherently incurs a higher volume of traffic than if the dwelling were on the backlot parcel. Because the dwelling is typically a higher intensity of use. So the way we see it is if you move the dwelling to the backlot parcel, most of the use of the property should be on the backlot and hopefully will actually lessen the amount of traversing the roadway. So just some thoughts there.
Can I just have a
Councillor
follow-up?
Kent, supplementary, yes.
Yes, thank you. Emily, I'm just a little unclear. So are we requiring as part of this, and are we going to be able to follow up on the fact that they remove all the living items and sever the top floor from the bottom floor? Like, I mean, nice idea, but it's already built and it's there. And I was just wondering how we were going to monitor and track that that happens. And I understand, I guess, that it wouldn't have to happen until such time as they built the other building.
Ms. Crowder?
Through you, Chair Bosomworth. What the applicant would need to do is they would need to undergo a formal change of use permit through the building department. So they would need to seek a building permit to change the use of the boathouse from a dwelling to a sleeping cabin. So there would be a site inspection where a building inspector would go into the building and would ensure that the cooking facilities had been removed and any other habitable features. It would not require there to be an actual separation of the upper story from the lower story. It would function as your normal two-story boathouse, but the inspector would go in and would be able to see that the conversion had happened before the issuance of a permit.
Thank you.
Committee, any other questions? Councillor Edwards. Hey, you.
Thank you. Yes, through the chair. Would this be under site plan agreement then if they have to change the living quarters and that? So
Ms. Crowder?
On title, so that anybody buys it, they can't convert it back.
Ms. Crowder?
Through you, Chair Bosomworth, to Councillor Edwards. The future development of a dwelling on the backlot parcel would in all likelihood trigger site plan control if it doubles the size of the existing ground floor area of the dwelling today, which the dwelling ground floor area is pretty small for a future dwelling. So in all likelihood, site plan control would be automatically triggered for the development of a dwelling. That being said, this planning approval would be on title for the property. So the change of the existing dwelling to a sleeping cabin, that would be on title for the property.
Ms. Crowder, I have a question. You're and this has to do with how many times the road has to be crossed. With the dwelling being on the water, you know, like, I don't know what the other use, they have tenants on the back lot today. So, and presumably their parking is on the back lot?
Through you, Chair Bosomworth. Yes, so there's a tennis court on the back lot. There's also a sleeping cabin on the back lot, and the parking happens on the back lot portion. So this application seeks to switch the uses. Waterfront currently contains the dwelling, back lot currently contains the sleeping cabin. They're hoping to switch those. And yes, the parking is currently on the back lot.
So it seemed to me that there is a chance that we could actually have more crossings of the road because now the dock is on one side, you know, the waterfront usage is on one side and the dwelling's on the back lot, whereas they both used to be on the water side, so there was no need to cross the road. So that's not really, I mean, we can debate that. It doesn't really matter. The point is, by having that distinct separation, is there any chance that we've increased our liability as a township for anything that might happen with people crossing the roads?
Through you, Chair Bosomworth. I don't believe so. I'm not an expert in our legal ramifications, but I think that when anybody crosses the road, I mean, there's two uses established already. There's a use on the waterfront lot, there's a use on the back lot, and these parcels have been tied together for planning purposes since the 80s. So no, is my answer.
Thank you very much. Seeing no more questions, I'm going to read the resolution. Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Edwards. Be it resolved that exemption F of zoning bylaw amendment application ZBA 47-24 to convert the first story use of a boathouse from a dwelling unit to a sleeping cabin be denied, and that exemptions A, B, C, D, and E be approved subject to the following. That the draft bylaw be revised to require a minimum setback of 66 feet from the road allowance abutting Juddhaven Road for development of a dwelling on the back lot parcel. That the draft bylaw be revised to prohibit the first story portion of the two-story boathouse from containing habitable floor area. That the draft bylaw be revised to permit a sleeping cabin with a floor area of 350 square feet within the second story portion of the two-story boathouse, and that any necessary revisions to the draft bylaw and schedules be made. And further, the third reading of the bylaw be withheld until such time as the consent agreement registered on title for the waterfront and backlot parcels be amended to the satisfactory of the township to reflect the following. That the owner agrees not to separately convey/transfer the waterfront and backlot parcels, and that the owner agrees to complete construction of a dwelling on the backlot parcel within 4 years of the date of approval of the bylaw. The sleeping cabin on the backlot parcel be removed to the satisfaction of the township or brought into zoning compliance, and a satisfactory license agreement is entered into with the township for a force main pump line located beneath the road allowance associated with the Juddhaven Road. Any discussion? Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to anyone. I'm just wondering if it appropriate or we leave it alone that the owner also agrees only use the lower level as for marine storage in this, so that going to maybe someone else's comment about how do we, or Councillor Kent, that is only going to be used for marine storage, and whether this would be maybe something that's kind of out there in left field, but I'm asking for an opinion. Could we do that?
Ms. Crowder, could we do it? Or Mr. Sharp, could we do it? And do you think it's necessary?
Through you, Chair Bosomworth, the recommendation put forth by staff recommends a revision to the bylaw today to prohibit the first story portion of the two-story boathouse from containing habitable floor area. I suppose you could take it a step further and state, and that marine storage use be the only permitted use within that floor. I'm not sure it's entirely necessary, as if habitable floor area is prohibited, then that inherently the only permitted use would be what's permitted in the first story of a boathouse. But I see Mr. Sharp wants to weigh in too.
Mr. Sharp.
Thank you. Ms. Crowder's done an excellent job answering questions, but I just wanted to state that the consent agreement could be amended or revised to include a provision wherein the owner agrees not to utilize the first story of the boathouse for uses that aren't permitted by the zoning bylaw or something to that effect. So if committee would like that to be included, that can certainly be done. Thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like that, because one of our biggest issues, I know this tenant or this owner will not do it. They will not, change it. I'm thinking of the other people, but we need to start putting some more acknowledgement, I think, on the side of the property owner to know that this. So thank you.
Mayor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you, just as an interesting point, but I do have one question. If we do that, do we not then tie that property to today's definition of permitted use and lose the flexibility they might have down the road if that changes?
Mr. Sharp.
Through you, Chair, I think that's why I was suggesting perhaps the wording that the first story be limited to uses that are permitted through zoning. And that way, if the zoning were to change, the consent agreement wouldn't need to be amended further. So I think we can come up with something that likely works to address that concern. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Is there anything in the provincial policy statement about the first level of a thing? I thought that because it's on floodplain, you weren't allowed to with the province. Is there some legislation on that through the chair? Thank you.
Mr. Sharp.
Through you, Chair. With respect to the first story habitable use of a boathouse, yes, clearly the provincial policy statement wouldn't support the habitable use of a boathouse on the first story. However, in this case, the first story is proposed to be converted to marine storage, in which case there would be no policy concern with that. Thank you.
Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. I'm just changing the tone a little bit. I'm happy with this application. We have many that I'm even aware of. I'm sure there's much more, but of people's sewage lines going under the road, the main roads. Clear Lake Road is a perfect example. So I don't have concerns there. And I don't even know that I need to say that, like I'm going to rely on the zoning bylaw, but I don't want to be specific to that storage has to be a marine thing because people need to put their furniture away, those kinds of things. And so I don't know that I need to get that specific. It's just that there's no habitable space in that area. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, seeing none. My comments would be along the line of Councillor Nishikawa. I don't, we're just going to turn this back into a normal use for first story basis. I don't see any real extra reason why we should put it in a site plan agreement or whatever agreements we have. We're just turning this back into what everybody else has. And I think it's a little restrictive and implying that, the current owner or the future owner won't be complying with our bylaws. We have the bylaws. We don't need to restate it in an agreement. That's my thoughts. But let me ask around, is that something we think we should be doing? It'll show of hands of whether we should be putting in that agreement or not. All those things we should be putting in the agreement? Should be putting it in? Councillor Nishikawa?
So the other issue is the first story of a boathouse is never habitable and not allowed. Like you need to get a license from, from the province to do that. If you have a two-story situation, that's the first thing you got to do is you got to go buy that land, right? So I don't know if that, I just think we're getting a little too prescriptive to this particular application, and that our bylaws are, we have to, I'm thinking, what is our bylaw officer reading? And what is our intent? And again, I can't then put the bylaw officer in a situation to say, we like this little piece of something, but we don't like this piece of something. That gets to be a little bit too prohibitive that I believe we couldn't defend. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Kent.
I actually, thank you, Chair Bosomworth. I actually think that we should put the restriction in because we can't really monitor use. So you might as well make it as clear as possible up front that we do not expect them to, apart from storing furniture and storing marine equipment, dock chairs and stuff like that, that is not supposed to be living quarters. So rather than having bylaw officers go out there every 6 months when somebody complains, it's easier to just put it in and say, these are the rules. And then we can still have that other stuff happen, but it's no harm off their back to elucidate what the actual rule is, in my opinion, because it's been a perpetual problem where, and I'm not talking about this particular applicant, Okay, but it has been an issue in the past that people say they're not going to use it for marine equipment, and they do. And they, shift the stuff around when a bylaw officer comes by. So I'd like to see it up front. I see no harm in doing that, but that's my particular view.
Mayor Kelly.
Thank you. And through you, I may have lost the thread somewhere along the way. So I want to make sure I'm talking about the right thing. Are we proposing to document by agreement what's already codified either in the bylaw or the policy statement?
And the provincial policy.
There's a couple of risks to doing that. Number one, unless we absolutely and 100% mirror the language that already applies, we've created two different definitions of what they're supposed to do. And anytime there's confusion, you're entitled to say, I don't have to do anything. And number two, if we have to do it in this file and we've done it in no other file, I would stand up and say, well, you didn't ask, you didn't put it in a contract, I don't have to do it. If it's already appropriately covered, either through legislation or through our own bylaws, I know it feels good to belt and suspender it, but the fact of the matter is we're probably adding confusion and not creating we're not making things better. I think we risk making them worse.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you for all this great input and discussion. And I understand what Mayor Kelly was just saying, at the risk of clouding it and giving it a loophole, I would withdraw my idea. Thank you.
All right. Any other further discussion? And then I'm going to call a question. None. So all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing two. That carries, right? All right. So that ends our public meeting section. We are now, and that was the zoning bylaw amendments. So we are now on to Ms. Huff is going to give us a report on 2024 statistics.
Good morning, committee. Thank you very much. Similar to previous years, I'm just going to present a report on the activities of the economic development, bylaw enforcement, planning, and building divisions of the municipality. But to begin with, I'd like to start with something that was not in the report. And unfortunately, at the time that the agenda was publicized, MPAC had not yet released their fact sheet on the most recent annual role assessments. And so they just came out yesterday. So I think it would be good, because it is really related to a lot of the work that this municipality does, to kind of highlight some of the things that are in that 2024 report. So what I'll say is Township of Muskoka Lake is number one in terms of assessment growth amongst municipalities in the seasonal property category. And so in 2024, there was 162 million in assessment growth. And that compares to, we were also number one last year, just for information, and we only had 61 million in assessment growth. So that's quite a jump. And, I know a lot of the assessments relate to building permits that were issued a number of years ago, and there was a flurry of building permit activity a number of years ago, but we're really seeing, I think, the assessment values come online for 2024. But we were also had the highest assessment growth amongst municipalities that had a population of 15,000 or less. And so MPAC showed us as having an assessment growth of 208 million. And just to note, again, in last year's roll, we were third amongst that population group with 152 million. So we were also substantially growing, again, compared to even last year. So that's some good news. And then I'll move on to a bunch of high-level summary information from each division. And I have to say it's been very impressive starting here and what the staff have accomplished. And I'm here really just as a messenger conveying their hard work and dedication to this municipality. So I want to highlight that as well. In terms of the building department, so 2024 was a successful year in the building division. issuing 1,111 building permits, construction value of 161 million and 1.5 million in building permit fees. And this represents more permit fees and value compared to last year as well. As well, the division also successfully implemented the first full year of the sewage system maintenance inspection program. And I know that we have already brought a year-end report to the December 12th planning committee meeting, so there's a lot more details on that, but the report that's before you today does have some summary details of that program. But I would like to say that, I think staff were overall very pleased with how it went. It really provided an opportunity to get information about how to maintain septic systems to the general public, which was, we heard a lot of valuable feedback from people that appreciated knowing that, as well as we were able to confirm and get rectified the vast majority of systems out there that were in working order. Moving on from building to economic development. So economic development administered 25,000 in community grants and 178,000 in approved CIP funding. And your economic development officer, Mr. Cox, he really assists applications through the entire grant making process, and even actually assists us, other departments in grant making. So helps us identify funding opportunities as well as writing the grant. So I know a number of our departments really rely on his services to that extent. He was also hard at working at the completion of a regional workforce strategy. We're working at reviewing and updating the CIP program, as well as an update to the special events bylaw, to name a few. Moving on to the bylaw enforcement department. So this was a big year for bylaw as well. Beyond just the number of occurrences, which increased from last year to 409, staff also had over 100 matters before provincial offences court, 71 AMPS notices, and many of those have been successfully dealt with in court. And perhaps not surprising to the committee since my time here, the most common request for bylaw service really relates to tree conservation, site alteration, dark sky, as well as assisting us with zoning matters. And then again, also keeping staff busy is the passing of the short-term rental bylaw, and staff have been working in that department through a number of steps and hurdles to implement that program in 2025. And finally, to the planning department, I understand they had another busy year. Applications on par with a 5-year average, having received over 318 applications. 200 staff reports were written, 288 pre-cons were held, and a number of OLT matters were dealt with at various stages through the process. Then you throw in the Canada Post strike at the end of the year that I think affected most of the municipal departments. And I have to say that, the planning department certainly were nimble in responding and being flexible to respond to that situation. I will mention that staff are working to make some tweaks to the internal planning process to make it more efficient and to allow the public and agencies more time to participate in the process. So this is something that we're already starting to implement. And as well, planning staff have taken the lead on completing various climate change reports that have been before council and committee throughout the year. Just a note for what to expect in 2025. I know all of the divisions are looking for opportunities to enhance service levels, find efficiencies, and improve communications. Some projects that you can look forward to seeing completed: year 2 of the new sewage system maintenance program, getting the short-term rental program up and running, improvements to the website for each division, updating the CIP program to allow for more opportunities for housing incentives, as well as just finding efficiencies through what we're calling a lean review process. So there are a number of statistics for each of the departments that are appended to this report, and I'll leave it there, but happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Committee, do we have any questions for Director Huff?
Many, but can't get one.
You can get one, you can get two. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. You got a great report and great success, and you definitely displays how busy our planning department is. I have two questions. One that you may want to take away as homework, because you're not going to have these numbers off the top of your head. But I'm interested to understanding. I will draw a line that said who were the top 20 in each of the categories that we were in number one in. And I'm thinking more along the lines of how do our peers or associated municipalities, the other 5, relate to us? Are they number 2? That's my first question. Or Ms. Huff.
Thank you, Chair. So actually, I do have the report in front of me, so I can speak to some of the numbers, but what I will also commit to doing is just passing this report on to council so that you can have the numbers yourself. So if I go to seasonal properties, number 2 is Blue Mountain. And of course, I realize that I need to blow up the stats a little bit more. They have, I'm going to say about 60 million. Sorry, I can't. My eyeglasses are failing me.
It's okay.
Sorry.
We can read the report.
Yeah, but just in terms of the first 5, so we're number 1, Blue Mountains, Seguin, Dystart. Okay, thank you. And then Innisfil. So you're in good company for those. And then in terms of the 15,000. So again, we're number 1, Blue Mountains is number 2 as well. A Huron municipality, a large. No. It's in Huron Township. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay, that's right.
And then Wellington North, and then Gravenhurst.
Then Gravenhurst.
Gravenhurst is number 5. Yep.
Thank you. Then
Thank
Councillor
you.
Nishikawa.
Through you to, well, I'm very curious if a further stat could be developed.
Yeah.
In our township. I'm aware that a lot of our building stats are not new build, like they're new builds, but they're not new residents, if I was to say it that way. So, you know, properties are being sold and then they're knocking down and, you know, and the reason why I'm asking this question is because I'm also in the background, I'm trying to do my own little study of where we're sending all of our building materials that are, so when we have a cottage torn down, does that go to the dump? Like all of, because that is adding up quite a bit. And I don't believe we're addressing it. So I'm just very curious about how many new properties, like as in we approved so many new lots. Yes, thank you.
Ms. Huff.
Certainly, through the chair to committee. So I can certainly look into how we can parse that information out from the stats that we have. I guess I would like some clarification if it's really on concern about what we do with our demolition material. Are you?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cloud that, but it's my part, my thing. So there's two things, two concerns I have about, and again, I'll do a presentation one day about the demolition part. I have to talk with district a little bit more, but also it's more, those large numbers that you mentioned doesn't necessarily mean that there's that much more tax dollars available for us to spend. So for instance, if you're another municipality that doesn't pay, you know, 40% to something, don't be looking that we're going to add that much more value, I guess. I'm just very concerned that the implication that all of a sudden are those large numbers mean that the taxes are going up and that there's going to be more money available to this municipality and the district. I don't want that to ever be clouded, I guess.
Ms. Huff, do you have any comments on that?
Thank you, Chair. I think I understand your point, so I can do what I can to get some of that information out and available to the committee for the next year's report.
My understanding is we covered some of that information in the budget. When you look at the budget, there was about, I'm going to say 1.4% in total increased residential assessed value, which means if we do nothing to our tax rate, our tax revenues will go up 1.4%. Okay. Mayor Kelly.
Okay, through you, if we do nothing with the budget, the tax rate goes down with this kind of growth. Because we can't collect more. I mean, I understand that if we set an assessment, we go, we collect that amount, but we can't go out and bill more than we actually commit to spend. Our budget has to balance.
No, my point was year over year, we get a 1.4% roughly. The district was around 1.4, 1.6, the total value increase of the assessed base. So if from one year to the next year, you did not change your tax rate, you'd be multiplying by a number that's 1.4% higher, and you would get that revenue. So when it's reflected in the budget, we talk about here's our increasement in assessment, and here's our increasement in the tax rate, and it's a little bit lower because we had that 1.4% growth. Councilor Edwards.
If it's a rebuild or anything else like that, does impact reassess it and raise the value? So we are getting more tax dollars, because if it's a $2 million assessment, it goes up to a $3 million assessment. It's assessed on that, is it not? Thank you.
Ms. Huff?
Through the chair, that's my understanding as well.
Okay. Councilor Roberts.
Thank you. Yes, I had two questions. You mentioned the number of provincial offenses that were handled and AMPs. So what are the offenses that the provincial courts are handling rather than AMPs?
Ms. Huff?
Thank you, Chair. It's a good question. So I think we're in a period of transition where a number of the POA that we're attending reflect charges that may have been laid prior to the implementation of AMPs. And so we're still in a period where we're active in pursuing or completing a lot of offenses that were done in previous years, but certainly transition is that a lot of offenses are now being moved under the AMPs and will be attending court less, saving money. It will go quicker. And so I expect those are some trends that you're going to see in the reports in the future.
Any other questions? No. I am curious about the shape and what ideas you had about improving your process. You know, when you talk to constituents, sometimes they say, oh, it's a really tough process. I'd love to have some just meat to be able to give back in a conversation saying, we do work on making things better. What sort of things do you have in mind?
Thank you. So what I've heard since I've started is that because a number of people don't live in the area, especially when we do our mail outs for circulations, for example, it does take some time for those residents to actually get the mail. And oftentimes they're getting notice of planning applications at the very last minute. And so we're trying to send out notices earlier in the process. So not sticking with the minimum timelines included in the Planning Act. So actually sending them out earlier so people have them earlier, but also providing draft notices to agencies so that they have a heads up that an application is coming forward and can engage with us and identify any issues earlier, so that it also gives us staff time to deal with those issues before it comes to the committee. And then hopefully that will allow us to have fewer deferrals because of information that's still outstanding. So those are two examples of some things that we're working on, and ultimately we hope it will help.
Good. I have another comment I'd like to make. This this township has invested fairly heavily in increased bylaw activity, and that shows up in this report. And I think it would be useful for us to communicate back to our constituency that they're getting some value for their money. And it sends two kinds of messages. One is, yes, we are proactively changing things. It also sends a message to anybody who thinks that they can get away with not complying with our bylaws, that we have a very effective and active enforcement agency, and they are successful, and we've got new tools that are helping us, and all that. I think if you that will help enforcement, because people know that we are out there and doing work. So that's my commentary. All right. BOP.
Thank you. Just very quickly, not to belabor the points, but just to go back, there were a lot of questions around the whether it's a demolition or renovation. If you look at Appendix 2 of Director Huff's report, the building permit stats actually do break it down by the type, so you can actually see the demolition. So new growth versus renovations, if councillors are interested in that. And also, like, just to very quickly, and thanks for indulging me just on the MPAC report. I think it's quite significant, and I know Jennifer Huff touched on, or Director Huff, sorry, seasonal municipalities and seasonal properties, and I think we know we're really leaders in the province there, as well as smaller municipalities under 15,000. But I think this is a new approach by MPAC. They've also provided those stats by region, so east, west, north, south, and we're in the central. And Director Huff didn't touch on that, might be being humble, but we are third in central Ontario. So that's of all size municipalities. So we are, yes, behind Barrie in growth, but essentially, largely tied with Kawartha Lakes in second. So, we're really, I think, punching above our weight for municipalities. We're talking, cities the size of Peterborough and Orillia, where our growth is significantly higher. And I know a brunt of that work goes to planning and building, and I commend them and bylaw for taking on this workload, but it touches all areas, departments, whether it trickles down to, roads, infrastructure, our cultural facilities, libraries, fire services, even around this table, and all the lengthy added discussions that we have around growth. So I really just want to take that opportunity, and thank you for that, to just commend all of staff for the hard work that we've done last year. Again, we're really, the growth is remarkable, and I think we're doing an excellent job both managing it. We continue to be a desirable place, I think, for people to come visit and live, but also to provide those services to the community. So just wanted to say thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Ms. Huff. Next, Mr. Sharp is going to give us a quick update on the comprehensive zoning bylaw update. So,
thank you, Chair Bosomworth, and good afternoon again, members of committee. I prepared a report containing information to update committee on the township's ongoing comprehensive zoning bylaw update. As detailed in my report, the project is in phase 2 of the project work plan, which is attached as an appendix to the report. Phase 2 involves identification of issues, how best to address them, and how best to implement the township's updated official plan. The project steering committee, together with the project consultants and staff, have met on 3 occasions thus far, and a 4th meeting is scheduled later this month. As detailed in my report, phase 2 has required 2 additional steering committee meetings that were not identified in the project work plan. It is felt that the fulsome discussions that have been occurring at the meetings will benefit the final product. Phase 2 will culminate in a final background review and directions report. It is anticipated that a draft report will be presented to Planning Committee this April, and phase 2 is anticipated to be completed in May. Stakeholder and community engagement will be the focus of phase 3, which is the next phase in the project. I have no further comments to add at this time, and I'd be happy to take any questions from committee. Thank you.
Committee, any questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Sharp. Ms. Huff, I think you're back up again, and you're going to tell us about the short-term rental implementation plan, I think.
Okay, thank you, committee. So when I was up here, I alluded to some of the work that we've been doing on implementing the short-term rental program. So I'll just get into some of the details. It is a big project. So the first item that obviously was completed is, as committee is aware, we're using the program Granicus to provide the township with a cloud-based online application program, and it's a processing platform as well. It assists staff in the back end of things as well. So getting the contract signed with Granicus has been completed, did take some time to review. And then after that, the next item is one of the first steps that Granicus identified for us to deal with is they needed to procure information from MPAC on property owners. And so that involved a number of discussions with ourselves, IT, the district staff, MPAC, and Granicus to go back and forth and find a way for them to procure that information. That is really fundamental and is the first step before they can actually start creating the application forms. And so I can tell you that that did take some time. We were successful. We do now have the assessment data that's been provided to Granicus, and Granicus has now started the process of sweeping the internet to find all of the short-term rentals. And that's also the other item that we had to deal with as well as, which has been done now, is integrating a new payment program into the finance department that is going to allow for the online processing of payment for application fees. So that's been dealt with as well. Again, it took some time, but we're there. And then, of course, the next big step is to build out the application program itself. So this takes quite a bit of time. And from what we understand from talking to other municipalities, it's really important to get this front end done correctly, because the last thing you want to do is you can tweak it, but you don't want to find fundamental issues with it after it's been up and running. So as well, the other key thing that we're starting to work on is developing what we need to do is develop internal application review processes amongst departments. And so that just requires us to have some discussions with bylaw, with building staff, with fire department, with planning staff. So when the applications come in, we know who's going to be reviewing them and how that's going to look. So that's where we're at today. Staff have completed 3 webinars in December, providing information to the public about the bylaw. And we're starting to receive a lot of calls from the public about who are eager to make an application. So the application portal is not up yet, and we're expecting it's still going to take a little bit of time. And so, you know, realizing where we are in terms of the implementation, staff are considering introducing perhaps some transition provisions into the bylaw that will acknowledge the fact that, you know, we don't want to penalize people for not having an application if the application program itself isn't available. So we are considering making some reasonable and measures to acknowledge that fact. And that will be something that will come back before committee or council in the near future. So that's where we're at today. I can tell you we have the licensing officer now in place, and well, I shouldn't say that. She actually starts on the 20th, but I know that this is taking up her time right now. She is knee deep into it, and it's great to have one person dedicated to taking on the things that need to be taken on. So it's a real benefit that we've, the municipality has chosen to bring that person on so early in the process. So I'll leave it there, but happy to answer any questions.
Committee questions? There's got to be some questions. I have a question. What was the question? I'm curious about what information we require from MPAC. You called it assessment information. Is it really just an address, or what information do they have that we don't?
Well, it's actually about getting permission from MPAC to use the information that MPAC has. So in terms of name and addresses, we need to get an agreement with MPAC for the release of that information to a third party that we're using. And then it allows Granicus on their end to match the addresses with the information that they can scrub on the internet to twin them and identify that these appear to be the owners of these short-term rentals. And then it flows through to, you know, at the very start of the program, is going to automate letters that are going to go directly to those that we think are short-term rentals. And that automation will save the municipality a significant number of time if we had to go and get that information on a one-off basis each time we sent the letter.
So is it fair to say, is it that their data is more current or it's in a better format than ours? Because surely we would know the owners of all of our properties.
So maybe, and I'll look to Crystal to explain this if I don't get it 100%, but we get our information from MPAC. And through the day-to-day operations of the municipality, we're able to use that information that we get. But because we've entered into a new agreement with MPAC, it really restricts use of that by a third party. And so in order for us to work with Granicus, we needed permission from MPAC.
Yeah, interesting.
Correct?
Then the second question I had was, you know, we said the short-term bylaw was coming in on January 1. What have we done to communicate people that they can't do the application yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. So certainly on the webinars and on our website, we've communicated that it's not available yet. We have said that it should be available in the next couple months, but in the meantime, we have provided a lot of information about these are the things that you're going to need to make the application. And then we've provided that list, we've provided examples, and we know that people are out there collecting that information so that when the portal does come, hopefully a lot of people will, you know, have a file sitting there, hopefully on their computer that they can just kind of download into the program.
All right, thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. It's more for Gradius, or whether they're called, and their normalization of data. When I was using the MPACT or the voters list, well, running, it's the same information, same database it's pulling from. And I had a look at, when I looked at, we would have many different formats for the same road, the way it's laid out. It could be road, Rosso 1 or 1 Rosso Road. How is the application handling that? Or does it have to do, yeah, anyways, it's, yes, so.
Yes, sir.
Through the chair, I think that will be a technical question that we will get into. Well, we're starting to get into those technical questions about how to format the data in a fashion that is consistent. That will be really important for sure.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Nishikawa, sorry.
The reason why I didn't have a specific question is a big, broader question. So I've heard today many ways that we could get people's email addresses. Like, you know, through the building department, through the planning department, I'm just wondering if there are steps moving forward that we have that database. Like, can we start, you know, getting our mailings out through email, that type of thing? Like, it's, can we make that a focus, you know, moving forward?
Director Peroshi.
Thank you for the question. Excuse me, I've been sitting here quietly. It's a great question, and it's something that we are working on. You would think it's something fairly easy, but I can tell you and assure you it's not. And we are, as like collectively, I'm working with a lot of, not even just the area municipalities, Ontario municipalities, on how we can do that. We can do that effectively so that it's not just for mail outs or just for one purpose, that we can use it across the board. So it's definitely something that it is on our radar. We're looking at doing, and we're looking at doing comprehensively and correctly the first time rather than having to constantly correct it. So it's on our radar. We're working on it. It's just a little bit more complicated than collecting emails.
Excellent question, Councillor Nishikawa. Thank you. CEO Pink, I think you have an update for us on the OLT.
Thank you. Yes, through you. Just very briefly, somewhat disappointed to report, we did have the third case management conference in front of the Ontario Land Tribunal for our official plan appeals this past Monday. The intent of that case management conference was to finalize issues lists and issue a procedural order so that we would have dates set for the hearing. Again, third case management conference. I believe the appeals were submitted in fall of 23 or late 23. And unfortunately, the issues lists were not able to be finalized. There still is disagreement amongst the parties, amongst legal counsel, on the content of those issues lists, and a fourth case management conference has now been set for March 28th. Committee has any questions available to answer?
CEO Pink, can you expand on the nature of the issues and which parties were more contentious than others?
Thank you. Through you, I believe I'm entitled to it. Was any member of the public was able to attend, and I believe many were watching the proceedings. I think just at a very high level, in essence, what the issue is, appeal forms and the content of appeals is legislated under the Planning Act as to what details one has to submit on the appeal form in order to then argue it under an issue. And as we know, there's 4 appeals to the Township Official Plan. One of the appellants raised concern with a number of policies, a large number of policies, that being our Muskoka. And some of the parties are taking exception that those policies and certain issues were not identified on the appeal form. So the tribunal has directed that legal counsel continue discussions, try to resolve those, potentially even consider formal mediation to resolve that issues list. But again, you can probably sense from my comments a little frustrated at the time this is taking and that it's dragging on. Unfortunately, that is the process, but at least the tribunal made it very clear that they wanted to set a fourth date and not leave it open-ended. So at least, hold the parties' feet to the fire to know that there's deadlines and goals to work towards. Hopefully in March, we can finally resolve that and set some dates. Of course, the frustration is at this point, we're simply trying to determine, again, the issues we are going to discuss, how much time we need, and to set actual dates. I'm getting the impression, the number of policies and issues, it's going to be a lengthy hearing, and those dates usually are set well in advance. So likely a hearing, I'm going to pure guess on my part, but likely much later this year. And then, of course, we have to wait for a decision. So it's still a long road ahead.
Any other questions for CEO Pink? Thank you very much. We have nothing else on the agenda other than to bid adieu. So let me read this motion. Moved by Councillor Nishikawa, second by Councillor Zavitz. Be it resolved that the Planning Committee meeting adjourn at 11:30 a.m. and the next regular Planning Committee meeting will be held on Thursday, February the 13th, 2025 at 9 a.m. via an electronically and in-person hybrid format in downtown beautiful Port Carling Council Chamber meetings, Port Carling, Ontario. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you very much.